Good afternoon, this is Nicholas from Gandora Gaming, and this is a new kind of video I'm going to try to do. This is going to be the history of a card game. This is where I discuss either archetypes, strategies, or mechanics that are introduced into a card game, go over its history, its playability, and see if it's any good, if it's getting any better, and where it goes from here. And I feel like what better way to do that is to start with the One Piece card game. It's a very new card game. A lot of new mechanics have been introduced, and we have seen them evolve over the last year. We've just officially hit a year in the TCG of the One Piece card game, so let's go. And what not better to discuss the colors and see where they go in the future. Are they any good now? And let's just see how they do. So I feel like usually you'd start off with red. Red is the strongest color in the game. It's been the strongest color for a very long time. A lot of the most popular characters are red. Luffy, the Straw Hats, you name it. Red is a very popular color. But I'm not going to start with red because I feel like if I start with red, I'll be setting myself up. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to start with the color purple. And the reason why I'm starting with color purple is because purple is the worst color in the game. It is absolutely, positively, no debate, the worst color. It's worse than blue. It's worse than green. Of course, it's worse than yellow, red, and black. It's just the worst. Now, purple wasn't always the worst deck. Purple has had its rises and its falls throughout the last 3 sets of its history, and I feel like it would be a shame not to go over with you today, because unlike red, where it's nothing but a escalating climb, purple has had ups, downs, lefts, and rights, and I feel like out of all the colors, it has a lot of potential and a lot of unmarked territory. So let's go over it today. This is my discussion video and the history of purple in the TCG. So, to start things off, we gotta start from the very beginning. Before there was Romance Dawn, before there was even a set revealed, there was the 4 starter decks. For the longest time, we had 4 starter decks, and those were the only cards we had, our only card pool, for about 6 months of the game. And I'm not gonna lie to you, those 4 structure decks were the ends of the earth. Without them, there was no play the game. There was only 4 colors at a time, that being green, blue, red, and purple, and they all had their basic generic playability down, but it wouldn't be expanded upon what each color did until further sets, especially set 1. Set 1 definitely is the Renaissance, but I feel like it would be a shame not to speak about the starter deck meta. So the starter deck meta, I'm not going to lie to you, purple was complete garbage, but so was red, which is a crazy thing to think about on hindsight, since a lot of cards for the original structure deck or starter deck in red and in purple are still played in those decks to this day. Really great starter decks that were 3 sets down the line. These cards are still being played as competitive levels, which is absolutely amazing. But when it comes to like the starter decks, blue and green were the way to go, with green in particular being the strongest deck out of the 4 colors. I remember my first time going to the sneak peek for the starter decks. I remember I grabbed red, thinking, oh, the red structure deck, this is going to be my deck. It's the Straw Hats. I watch the anime, I read the manga. I want to have a Straw Hat deck. That's the reason why I joined the game. I wanted to play this deck. And I remember everyone around me saying, you chose the wrong deck. Because everyone was right. For the starter deck meta, green was the way to go. Green was the mid-range / controlling deck that had based around counters and hitting people really hard with double attacks. And a lot of decks couldn't really deal with it that well. Blue was the best option against green. That's why blue was the second best deck. And it was a very defensive and very control-based archetype. So Crocodile was able to handle itself with early green. But red with its early rush cards and blue with, purple with its early ramp-up ability. That's what purple is, by the way. A lot of cards center around ramp-up. Now, if you are a Yu-Gi-Oh player, you probably don't even know what ramp-up is. So I'm going to explain it real quick to you. In the game of One Piece and a lot of card games, you cannot just summon multiple monsters in a row. Well, you can, but it's not all at once. It's progressively throughout the turns. So every card has a cost to it from 1 to 12. And then they have extra effects depending on them for additional cost. Now, the best way to explain this is basically this. I have a character with 2 costs in my hand. In order to summon this character, I need to rest 2 Dawn, or 2 energy, or 2 mana. And basically, every turn you progressively add mana to yourself until you get to 10. The most you can have is 10 mana, or 10 Dawn in this case. Dawn is our mana. So the whole point of Ramp Up, or Purple, is to use cards and effects to accelerate our Dawn production so that we get to 10 Dawn a lot quicker so we can summon our higher level monsters. So Purple's big play is a lot of their monsters are high cost cards, or a lot of return Dawn back to the deck in order to do effects cost. Basically meaning, in simple and layman's terms, Purple has a lot of really powerful effects that require a lot of cost to do them. And in order to pay for that cost, you need cards in order to ramp up so you can cover it as quick as possible, so you're not outpaced by your other opponents. That is the point of Purple, and no deck, or at least no leader, can better simulate that than Kaido. Kaido is our first and very own leader, and he has a simple basic effect. Basically, it says, one return during the main phase, minus 7 Dawn. So you return 7 Dawn back into the deck, and then you get to rip a card from your trash a card from your opponent's life. If you don't know the One Piece card game, there is life, and life is a resource. Once you hit 0 life and you get hit one more time, you lose the duel. So the fact that Kaido, using 7 Dawn, could just rip a life is a very, very powerful effect. Now, 7 is a high cost, thus he must use ramp-up cards in order to accelerate his Dawn production so he can pay for that cost. Because once he minuses 7 Dawn, those Dawn get put back in the deck. He's only getting 2 a turn for the natural progression of the game. He needs to continuously ramp up Dawn in order to keep ripping cards from your life. Very, very important effects. And ultimately, Kaido in the starter deck meta wasn't enough. The cards in the structure deck were powerful, but there was not enough playmakers to help you in the mid-range and early game. You got outpaced by green too much and outdefensed by blue too much in order to compete, and red was just too rushy in general. Red has never been a good matchup for you as a purple player, so it was never really a good time. Now, this leads us to the next set. This set being Romance Dawn. This is the first set in the entire game, and what a set it was. It introduced a whole bunch of new characters and multicolors, and the game has never been the same since. This is the set that defined each color of what their play style was. Yes, the starter decks did establish what they were, but the Romance Dawn set actually elaborated on this and basically expanded upon them in ways we didn't really think possible. We got a lot of new green leaders, a lot of purple leaders, and a lot of blue and red. Now, I'm not going to focus on the other leaders, except one, which will be Zora, but we'll get into that. The leaders I want to talk about today, which were in Romance Dawn, were King, Kaido, which was blue-purple Kaido, and blue-purple Crocodile. These were the leaders introduced in this set for purple. And my oh my, they were strong. Now, King in particular is a shitty leader. I'm not going to lie to you. He's our only other pure purple leader that we had at this time, and he kind of sucks. So I'm going to go over him real quick, and I'll go over the potentially good ones. So King is, if you have 10 Dawn cards on the field, give all your opponent's characters minus 1,000 power. Not good at all at the slightest. The fact that it's only during your turn is ass, because I would love if it minus your opponent's turn on their turn. Thus, all their characters will be weaker, so you're more protected. But the fact that you'd have 10 Dawn exactly, and a deck that is purple that wants to lose Dawn in order to summon really powerful effects, it just was not good enough. King had the potential for greatness. It was an Animal Kingdom pirate, so you could play cards like the 10-drop Kaido in the deck, but there was nothing really helping its playstyle, And even to this day, at set 3, there's still nothing helping out this playstyle. So King never really took off. It's probably one of the worst leaders in the game next to Uta. Just a really, really horrible leader in general. But the other two leaders, on the other hand, had huge metagame potential and actually saw some huge play. That being Purple Blue Crocodile and Purple Blue Kaido. Now let's go over Crocodile first because Crocodile was actually the more relevant one overall. Basically, Blue Purple Crocodile says with one Dawn attached to him, you can activate an event card. When you activate an event card, draw one card. If you have 4 or less cards in your hand and you haven't drawn a card using the leader effect during this turn. So basically it allows you to draw a card when you activate events. The whole point of Blue Purple Crocodile was you play like 20 to 30 event cards and you out-resource your opponent as a very, very control-based archetype. And you basically outgrind your opponent out of the game. A lot of good players from Ryan Fletcher played this deck. And it was very hard to play, very skill-intensive, and won you a lot of duels. Now, Blue Purple Kaido, on the other hand, had huge potential. I think it had some meta relevance, but not to the extent that Blue Purple Crocodile did, or just Purple Kaido himself. But Blue Purple Kaido has a really, really powerful ability. So basically, he has the effect when when any of your cards KO one of your opponent's cards, you get a 1 Dawn. So he actually solves one of the biggest issues with Purple, and the simple fact that his ability helps you ramp up. This is the first leader, and probably actually the only leader, where their ability helped you gain advantage through ramp up. He's the only leader that actually does that, to my knowledge, and that is a very, very powerful effect. Now, to this day, at set 3, there is not a lot of blue-purple cards that, like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of generic good blue cards, a lot of generic good purple cards, but nothing that actually pushes the deck over the edge. Now, I will say once set 4 comes out, which will be later on in this discussion, Blue-Purple Crocodile becomes a menace. But as of right now, in the current format, it ain't doing so great. But at the time, in set 1, it was a scary deck to deal with. The fact you could also play the 10-drop Kaido in this deck was really, really strong. As long as you had Animal Beast Pirates in your name, you could just board wipe your opponent with a 10-drop Kaido. Now, 10-drop Kaido in current set 3 isn't good, but during set 1, he was the playmaker. He was the scariest monster in the entire game, and he deserved it. For the minusing of, I believe, like 6 Dawn, you get a free 12,000 beat stick that literally says destroy all cards on the field regardless of level. Very, very powerful card. Really busted at the time, and he was the only really leader. He was the only character that had 12,000 attack at the time. A lot of characters came close to that, or if not, they fell below it, and that really pushed them underneath. Kaido in set 1 was a very scary deck. It was second, if not the best deck of the format. The Romance Dawn meta was very complex, but there was one clear winner for the majority of the format, and that winner was Eustace Captain Kidd. Even though 4 or 5 new leaders have come, and a brand new support that came for all colors, green was still the best color in the game, even after the initial starter decks. Green was just better because of one card keeping them in the format. That card, if ever power crept, will kick green out of the format for good. That card being Eustace Captain Kidd, the 8-drop. The 8-drop was essential for all green players. Basically, with 1 Dawn on your opponent's turn, if this character is rested and has a Dawn on him, your opponent can't attack any other character other than him. And that is a very, very nasty effect right there. Basically meaning he's an 8,000 defense wall. And as long as you can protect that wall, your opponent can't hit your life. It's a very, very scary thing to deal with. And at the time when there's only 4 colors in the game, the only decks prepared to deal with a green player was another green player or a purple player, because purple player had Kaido and had a lot of big drop characters. So purple in general, not just Kaido in particular, but purple in general was just the best way to deal with the Green Menace. Green had absolutely destroyed Blue and absolutely destroyed Red. Don't get me wrong, Red and Blue were really, really strong in this format as well. I would say arguably so. To me, there was 5 decks that ultimately came in and out of the best deck title. Those 5 being Green Kid, Green Red Law, Red Zoro, Purple Kaido, and Blue Don Quixote Doflamingo. These were the 5 best decks in the format. Don't get me wrong, Blue Purple Kaido and Blue Purple Crocodile and the other leaders were still relevant this format. But it was definitely these 5 that set the standard of One Piece leaders and abilities. The simple fact that these leaders countered each other was a perfect harmony of rock, paper, scissors. When it comes to that, I feel like every archetype or every color countered each other and had a big weakness to the other. That's what I mean by rock, paper, scissors format, because every archetype felt like it was strong against one and weak against another. For example, the best deck at the time, Green, which was Use's Kid, was great against decks like Red and Blue, like Doflamingo, because they had a horrible time dealing with the 8-drop Kid. But decks that can deal with the 8-drop Kid in the form of Kaido or Blue, Purple, other Kaido, or just King, but no one played King. But decks that can just play the 10-drop Kaido or just high monsters in general actually had a great time against Green in general and definitely pushed Green to its limits. Red had a great time against Purple because it outrushed them. It could only ramp up so quick in the early game at the time, so Red rushing Purple meant that Red had a really good matchup against Purple, but it did have a great matchup against Green. Not as bad as Blue did, but it was an uphill battle. And as for Blue itself, it had a horrible matchup against. Blue was defense the deck. As you are a whole bunch of little rush monsters, Blue was a whole bunch of big defense position monsters. Meaning you would rush your little dudes into big walls that would keep replenishing themselves with Doflamingo's ability. Meaning Red had a horrible time against Blue. Not always, but a lot of times. Now, Blue, on the other hand, had a decent matchup against Purple. Not the greatest, but a decent matchup. But had a horrible matchup against Green. The 8-drop was impossible to deal with. Their highest attack monster for Blue at the time, and for the longest time, was Mihawk. Mihawk had 9,000, which was bigger than the Kid, but it took 9 Dawn just to summon that Mihawk, and even then, once they establish the Kid will have multiple blockers with them. Meaning, you needed more than just one attacker to clear a Kid. Meaning, just because you had one guy bigger wasn't going to mean you get to do any damage that turn. Which meant Blue had a horrible, horrible time dealing with the double attacking Useless Kid leader that would just pummel their life into nothingness. And of course, like I said, Purple really, really loved beating the shit out of Green. It really did. The fact they could board nuke all of Green's resources, they couldn't replenish themselves like Red and Blue can. Red and Blue played low to the ground, while Green was mid-range and Purple was high range, high cost. Purple players had to deal with other Purple players. You could drop a 10-drop Kaido and then have that 10-drop Kaido be destroyed by another 10-drop Kaido. It was a very particular format, and depending on your matchups, determined your duel. It wasn't always like guaranteed, but it definitely mattered. And that's why I would consider the early format a rock, paper, scissors format. Depending on your matchup, didn't always determine the duel, but it highly put one deck over the other in outcome. And that's why there was no like clear best deck, but because Green had a best overall against every other deck but Purple, put Green as the best deck of the format, at least until the first structure deck, or at least first starter deck, since the original starter decks came out, that being Purple Film Starter Deck. With the introduction of the Film Structure Deck, we were introduced to a new purple leader and a whole bunch of new, viable, and powerful purple film cards that will absolutely shake up the game for 1 month. This format, in between Set 1's finale and the beginning of Set 2, Kaido was the best deck. Right before Set 2 was fully revealed and came out, Kaido the Purple was the best deck. The only reason why was because they were introduced to a new wave of cards. The simple fact that Purple had more card pool than all the other colors gave it the edge. It didn't matter if the leader that they got was average. It didn't matter if all the other cards in the structure deck were okay at best. The simple fact that Purple got brand new cards and able to boost the strategy when there has been so limited of cards in the resource engine that was the One Piece card game pushed Purple for 1 month to be the best deck of the format. Now, the leader introduced in this format was our first, well, not our first, but our newest full color purple leader, being Shanks. Shanks had the ability where if you once return, you could minus 3 Dawn or return 3 Dawn back to the deck. And basically, all film type characters gain 2,000 power during this turn. That is a very, very solid effect, but overall was looked at as a weaker leader at the time. Now, I think Shanks is actually a pretty solid leader. Expect a deck profile on Shanks later on this week. But I think Shanks at this time was overlooked for the simple fact that Kaido was just the strongest leader. Just for the simple fact that the 10 drop was still a viable option in the game, that the fact that Shanks could not play the 10 drop completely shot him out of contention as a playable leader. The film cards that were introduced to were absolutely insane, however. Unlike Shanks, who was an average power leader, I would say that the new cards that we got for Purple were absolutely astonishing. Not only did we get a new 8-drop that would definitely help you push for the game in the form of Douglas Bullet. Douglas Bullet was a very, very powerful card where he says minus 4 Dawn, rest 2 of your opponent's characters with a cost 6 or less, then this character gains double attack this turn. Basically saying, hey, I have a 10,000 attack monster that you can boost with my Shanks to make him 12,000 attack, that if he hits your life points will make you lose 2 life. Also, he rests 2 of your blockers, so good luck with that. Douglas Bullet is still a very, very scary card to this day. He's not seen in any meta decks right now, but I do believe once Set 4 comes out, I do believe the Douglas Bullet will find a home in newer strategies. Other cards introduced in this set were our first purple searcher in the form of Benefista. Every color up to this point besides purple had a Nabi searcher. And what I mean by Nabi searcher is a card that can ultimately search cards in its archetype. Green had Perona and also had Momonosuke. Red had Nabi. Blue technically didn't have anyone, but it had Perona, which helped you scout the tech cards in your deck, and because you played Doflamingo, it allowed you to special summon it from your hand, so it's basically your version of Nabi. But Purple didn't really have a way to search Animal King Pirate cards. We actually won't get an Animal King Pirate searcher until Set 4, which is absolutely insane to me, but let's keep going. Benefisa basically says, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, reveal 1 film character card from your deck to hand, and then add it to your hand. Now, at the time this card was average, it's a 2k counter searcher. It's really, really amazing, but there wasn't a home for it deck yet. Because there was only 1 film leader in the form of Shanks that could actually play these cards, there would not be a home for the film cards. But I'm going to keep hinting at, once Set 4 comes out, there will finally be a home for the film cards, and they will actually see much more meta play going forward. Other cards I do want to mention just real quick will be Uta, which is a really, really amazing 4K blocker, which says, hey, not only do I have 1,000 counter, so you can discard me to be an effect mailer, but also you can -1 Dawn on block, rest one up to one of your opponent's characters with 5 or less costs. Basically meaning it's a double blocker, which is absolutely insane. Probably one of the best blockers in the game, and is gatekeeps for the simple fact that it's a purple card. Really, really sad. And then finally, the last card I do want to mention on this list would have to be Gil Terizo. For the simple fact that -2 Dawn, when this card declares an attack, you get to draw 2 cards. This card for a 5k keeps attacking and keeps drawing you cards. The only issue with him is that he doesn't have a counter, but in a playable strategy, he definitely has potential going forward. So these cards definitely push purple up to tier, but it was only for a month. Like I said, Kaido became the best deck of the format because he can use these purple film cards to boost the consistency of its deck. One of the biggest issues with Kaido and Ramp Up in general was because they didn't have a Nabi, the deck was very inconsistent. And it didn't have a really good way to search up Ramp Up cards. It was kind of a you draw your hand and that's the best you got kind of scenario. Meaning, a lot of the times, if you did not draw your field spell, which is your ultimate best way to ramp up your deck, you just got outpaced. Even if you had a great time against green, green will outpace the shit out of you if you had no way to ramp up your deck. Meaning, it was a very high miss, high reward deck. If you got the field spell early, you played the game like any other deck, and you usually won the duel. If you did not get to your field spell, then you usually lost the duel, and that was just a sad state of affairs. So, the simple fact that the purple added to your consistency, maybe not by a lot, but enough to raise it above the other decks from Romance Dawn, was definitely something to not scoff at. But now we enter the next set, Set 2, Paramount War. With the introduction of the Paramount War, we got a brand new color in the form of black. And black was a very, very powerful new mechanic introduced into the game. While red focused on rush, green focused on double attacking mid-range, purple focused on ramp up and big monsters, and of course blue focused on bouncing cards and defense. Black will focus on lowering the cost of your opponent's cards and then blowing the fuck out of them with freaking powerful blow-up effects from either monsters or spells. This is the Marines. The Marines are a huge part of the One Piece story, and their first introduction into the card game is with this set. Paramount War introduces not only new waves for both all the existing colors so far, but also black itself. Going alongside the Paramount Wars deck, or the set release, was also, a little earlier, a new structure deck in the form of the Marine structure deck, which had Alkainu as their new leader. Now, Alkainu was not the greatest black leader, and to be honest, he still doesn't see that much play to this day, so I'm not going to really show him or mention him that much. But just know that the cards introduced within that structure deck, and of course set 2, push black into the metagame. Now, the metagame exploded with popularity. No longer was purple the best deck, but it was still a very, very strong deck for a good portion of the format. I would argue with the inclusion of the film cards and the new Impel Down Magellan cards, purple actually stayed well into the format. It stayed a very, very strong deck for the majority of it. Now, as the format progresses and towards the end of the format, I would say purple becomes the 5th to 6th best deck in the format. At least Kaido did. Magellan is the leader introduced into this format, and Magellan is a very interesting leader. Basically, on your turn, once returned, when a Dawn card on your field is returned to the Dawn deck, this leader gains 1,000 power this turn. This is a really solid effect for the simple fact that purple does a lot of returning Dawn back into the deck in order to get very beneficial effects. Now, the only issue I have with Magellan is the simple fact that it's on your turn. a lot of defensive spells or counter spells return Dawn on your opponent's turn. And I would love if Magellan had the effect to gain 1,000 if for the whole turn if you return Dawn during your opponent's turn as well. But you can only do what you can do. Magellan was a very, very solid leader, and it still sees meta relevance today. Actually, the matter of fact, Magellan is currently the strongest purple deck in set 3. Now, I'm going ahead of myself, but I just feel like I should mention that now, since Magellan is actually the highest point of purple's playability. Don't get me wrong, Kaido was the highest point of like the best deck, but Magellan is the current strongest deck and the peak of purple at the current card game as we speak. There has not been a stronger leader or a stronger version of purple than the Magellan decks we have right now in the current format. The inbound down purple cards revolve around minusing your opponent's Dawn. The whole point of Magellan was basically using powerful monsters just like the Kaido decks did, but instead of using spell cards to ramp up, they would use monsters in the form of jailer beasts in order to get their advantage that way. Powerful monsters that on death gave you Dawn. Powerful jailer beasts in the form of Mido Koala and Minotauru were very, very powerful at the time. For the simple fact that they were really, really strong standard 5K monsters with 4 costs that simply had an effect where either one did double damage, one was a blocker, and if they died, they gave you a rested Dawn, which was a very, very powerful effect at the time. For this was the first color other than Kaido that actually had its own built-in ramp-up mechanic. Film cards had them too, but they were in the form of like individual kind of cards. Purple finally introduced a cohesive wave of monsters that synergized with each other that had to do with ramping up. And Purple's solution to all these other decks increasing in strength and power was to lower their strength. If Purple can keep their Dawn count low, then they can lower the Dawn, basically control the game. Purple Magellan is a very cool mid-range control deck. Yes, the deck does have powerful big beat sticks in the deck, but the deck revolves around level 5s and level 6s. The strongest Magellan card that is currently in the deck is Magellan himself, a 5k 6,000 attack monster who on play minuses a Dawn from your and your opponent's life. So basically, on his summon, you lose a Dawn and your opponent loses a Dawn. Then, if this character is KO'd, your opponent loses 2 Dawn. The whole idea is that he's basically a lose-lose scenario. Not only is he a 6,000 beat stick that's going to continuously hit your opponent every turn, but if they ever manage to kill this monster, it would then put them back an entire turn in Dawn, which is very, very bad against Purple, which is a ramp-up deck, meaning as they're gaining Dawn, your opponent's losing Dawn. And definitely in set 2 was a very, very powerful deck, especially since the increase of other decks skyrocketed. Black, for example, which was the deck introduced in this format, received very, very powerful cards in the form of a Kainu the 7-drop and Aokiji the 10-drop. Aokiji the 10-drop was a very, very terrifying monster for the simple fact on summon it lowered everything by 5 costs. It lowered everything continuously on your turn, and then it blew up anything with a Dawn 1 or less. Aokiji is a very, very scary 10-drop, and finally put pressure on what is the best 10-drop in the game. This card outclassed the Kaido, where Kaido could nuke the entire board and waste all your Dawn. This guy did not waste any Dawn, blew up a character, and just lowered your opponent's entire field to the point that you can just blow up your opponent's cards with your remaining Dawn and your remaining characters to out-resource the shit out of your opponent. Not to mention, Aokiji is just a really, really big monster. They also have the form of Barcelino as one of the best blockers of the game. A 4-cost, 5,000 attack blocker who says, On your opponent's turn, this card gains 1,000 and can't be destroyed by card effects. I mean, the only way to kill him is with battle, and since he's a 4K cost, 6,000 counter, 6,000 blocker, it was very hard to kill him, and it made black a very, very powerful deck for purple to deal with. Black outclassed purple in a form of big beat sticks to deck. Yes, purple had bigger beat sticks, but black had better beat sticks, if that makes any sense. Yes, purple had bigger ones, but black ultimately was just a better deck in general. Other decks that I do want to include that got amazing support this set were Kinemon for green. The Wado cards made that deck a very aggro-aggressive deck, which was not good for Kaido as a purple deck, just for the simple fact that Kaido's best thing was that he could deal with green's ability to just sit on a 8-drop and then pass. The fact that Kaido can punish you for that made green a very, very easy target. But in the introduction of the new Wado cards for set 2 in the form of Kinemon and Odin, it was no longer easy peasy for purple to win against the green matchup. That was an actual struggle. Other decks also got better. Red got the form of Whitebeard. Whitebeard has been one of the best decks in the format ever since set 2, and definitely becomes the best set deck in set 3. Red Zoro and Red Green Law are still really powerful in this format, if not even stronger in this format, with the introduction of the generic Whitebeard cards, and also just generic red cards in general that just boost the deck up even more consistency. Now, Blue Doflamingo didn't get much this set, but they did, however, get Ivankov. Ivankov was the new blue leader that showed the show, and it was the other impelled down side of the deck. And it looks like the Paramount War was given to both green, black, and red, while the impelled down arc was given to both purple and blue. I think Ivankov was a really, really strong deck that had to do with discarding cards from your hand in order to draw cards during the end phase, and had this really cool resource ability engine. All these decks overall had a very, very powerful setup, but in the end, I still feel like Kaido was still in the top 5, if not top 6 leaders in the format. And it's hard to really argue which one was the best. I would say Zoro would definitely be the best for set 2, but it could be argued that Law was the best for set 2, or early Whitebeard was the best for set 2. It's really hard to say. Now, when it comes to set 3, now things get interesting, because we are introduced to not only a brand new color, but a new dominating force in the meta. So set 3 was the end and the demise of purple as a playable color. Don't get me wrong, I think Magellan is a really, really strong leader and still really good. But that deck is outdated for the simple fact that everything in set 3 held every other color but purple. And the reason why was because purple did get a new leader and they did get new cards, but those cards are locked underneath that archetype, and that archetype was not the greatest. This being Iceberg and the Water 7 Gali Law cards. Now, Gali Law is a really, really cool mechanic. Iceberg is probably one of my favorite leaders of all time, but as a competitive leader, he's probably there with Uta and King in terms of playability in the meta, for the simple fact that he just does not do enough. And that's the reason why purple hasn't done anything since set 3. Purple's last time in the meta, like top 5 best decks, has been since set 2, which has been a couple months now. It's probably been like 4 to 5 months, and it's continuing to be like that until set 4, where purple finally gets some more new cards. But this set did no good for purple. Don't get me wrong, the Gali Law cards we do get in this set are interesting and make a very, very fun and interesting deck, but the simple fact that Iceberg as a leader is just not good enough in the game. They gave one of the most broken effects to a leader, but gave him the most heaviest restriction that we have seen in the game so far. So this is Iceberg. Iceberg says, once returned, -1 Dawn. Return it to the deck. Then rest this leader. Play a Galila type card with 5 or less costs from your hand. So this card says, with the cost of 1 Dawn, you get to special summon a level 5 or lower Galila card from your deck, from your hand to your field. That is a very, very broken ability. There's only one downside. The reason why Galila Iceberg is not a viable deck in this format. This simple line of text. This leader can't attack. That's right. This is the first leader introduced into the One Piece game that can't attack. This leader is forced to always just sit there and just look at your opponent. Meaning your early game is even worse than normal Purple's early game. Because Purple is a ramp-up deck, yes. And their whole gimmick is that they want to ramp up into very, very powerful monsters in order to put pressure on your opponent. And ultimately win the duel using the ramp-up ability. But the issue of Iceberg is because he can't attack, means it takes like turn 3 or 4 before you can even swing at your opponent. Not to mention, if your opponent manages to clear your monsters, you are out of luck. You are not red. Your monsters have summoning sickness. So if they put you on top deck mode as an Iceberg player, you just lose. For the simple fact that your monsters will take a turn before they can even swing, and by then they're already taking your life out of the game. Because Iceberg himself cannot attack, it has ruined his deck's playability, and has set Purple as a color back one whole set, while every other color introduced, including the newest color, Yellow, absolutely crush it with their support. Purple does not do it. For that one line of text completely cripples Purple's playability in the meta. I think the Purple cards introduced in Water 7 are really, really strong cards. But the simple fact that they're kind of gate locked into the Galila archetype, and the Galila leader is stuck not attacking, means until new support comes to push this deck into the meta, Galila Iceberg is just not doing anything. Meaning all the cards that we get for Purple are not doing anything. Meaning that all the leaders that we have for Purple that are viable are one whole set behind the support to every other color of the game. That is not good. Especially since Set 3 introduces Yellow as the final color into our little spectrum of leaders. Yellow is the final new color introduced for Pillars of Strength, which is the name of this set. And Yellow absolutely destroys Purple. More than Red, funny enough. Like, Red was the MVP against Purple decks, but now Yellow is. Yellow absolutely dominates Purple for the simple fact that Purple sucks at the early game. Their best bet is the late game. But here's the issue. Not only can Yellow put pressure in the early game, but they're a better deck than Purple in the end game. For the simple fact that the cards they get in Set 3 as their introduction cards and their structure deck cards far outweigh the cards that we still use in Set 2 and in Set 1 cards for Purple. The Big Mom cards in particular absolutely devastate Purple as a leader. Purple is going to lose life very quickly in the early game. The whole point of Purple is to keep their life towards the end. But that isn't good against a Yellow player, because Yellow player gets stronger during the end game, and also minuses your opponent's life. Yes, I know how I mentioned earlier in this video, Kaido's whole gimmick of minusing 7 Dawn in order to rip a life out of your opponent's life. But Big Mom says, hello, give me that life back, please, and I'll take a life from you. How about that? Yes, Big Mom has 2 very powerful boss monsters that put Kaido's boss monsters to shame in the form of Big Mom and Big Mom. We also got Katakuri, which is a level 8 guy that also just puts anything in the bottom of the deck, which is really good. Actually puts him back in the bottom of life, which is why I don't play him, but he's still a good card. But the Big Moms themselves are absolutely stupid. The 7-drop, 8,000 attack Big Mom is terrifying. By turn 3, they are manipulating their life, and not to mention, they're ripping their opponent's life apart. Yellow, for the simple fact that their life triggers summoning powerful monsters or minusing your opponent's life, completely cripples purple as a strategy, especially since purple didn't get any new cards to help him compete against yellow. And every other color is the same. Green, which was purple's best matchup for the longest time, is now even worse for them. Because now we are introduced to Kuro, a hyper aggro green deck. Basically, topping it off from green being a mid-range deck to a full-blown aggro aggressive green deck. Which means purple, which best matchup was green, now isn't. Because now green has an answer to purple's ramp up ability by just pressuring in the early game and completely wiping out purple off the map. And that goes for every color on this list. This format is run by the red decks. Guess what? Another color that completely dominates this format, red. It completely crushes purple. What is purple supposed to do? Purple's gimmick is ramp up. They never had a good matchup against red, and now we have 4 red decks as the best decks of the format. Ace, Whitebeard, Red, Green, Law, and Zoro. Yes, all 4 decks, with Ace being introduced in this set, completely outshine anything purple has to even try to compete this format. Now, blue is in the same boat as purple as not being a great spot at the moment, but even they got Nami cards. And don't get me wrong, the Nami cards are good, especially since they got OCG hit before they can even be viable in the TCG. But there are still some generic good spells and counter cards given to us, just so to boost up blue in general. Blue's not in a great spot either in this format, but purple is even in a worse spot, because purple's stuck playing with all the set 2 cards, and at least blue gets to play with some of the set 2 cards, and then every other color is playing with set 3 and beyond cards, pushing purple out of this meta contention and out of the viability for the foreseeable future. Now we enter set 4. Set 4 introduced, and I don't know what time it comes out in the TCG, but that does not matter. Set 4 changes everything, because it not only introduces 1, but also introduces 2 purple decks. And both those purple decks are absolutely great for purple. They needed this so bad, and not to mention, once this set is over, we are also getting a new structure deck. We're getting 3 new purple structure decks that completely revamp purple as a whole. So let's get into that. So with the introduction of the newest set, which I still don't actually know its name, I probably can look it up, but this video is over going long enough, so this is just going to be a quick 2-minute thing going over set 4 and purple going forward as a future meta contender. So we are both getting 2 really strong purple leaders. These 2 leaders fix purple's biggest issue, that being Doflamingo, which is purple green, and purple yellow crocodile. These 2 leaders are absolutely insane. Yes, their leader abilities are strong, but just the simple fact that their color matching fixes purple immensely. With the introduction of the Doflamingo engine, now you can play the powerful green film cards with the powerful purple film cards, allowing you to have a really synergistic, powerful film-based strategy. So that structure deck that I spent 7 minutes talking about like 20 minutes ago finally can enter the metagame again, just for the simple fact that the Doflamingo cards now make it possible to play the green film cards with the purple film cards, making it an actual viable deck. You no longer have to play Shanks. You can play Doflamingo and have a very competitive and powerful green-purple deck in this format. As for purple-yellow fixes one of the biggest issues in their format, the dealing with yellow. Yellow is an absolute catastrophe, but at least with purple-yellow, you can also play Big Mom to recruit your life back into your deck. Not to mention, the other yellow cards introduced also increase your life in the form of Yamato and in the form of the 8-drop Crocodile. So now you have a way to manipulate your life so you can also gain advantage. No longer do you have to worry about the whims of yellow ripping your life away and you just sitting there crying about it. Now, you have a way to not only take their life, but also gain it back in the form of your yellow cards that you can play with your purple cards, which is very, very amazing for the strategy. Now, that is it for set 4 as a whole, but with the introduction of set 4, we also get 3 new starter decks that are absolutely cracked for the deck. This being Red Purple Luffy, Red Purple Law, and Red Purple Kid. These 3 structure decks revamp both red and purple to make them tiered competitive decks going forward. And this fixes purple's biggest issue, dealing with the red cards, because now we have aggro purple decks in the form of Luffy and Kid. And we have a control-based deck in the form of Law. These decks does fix purple's biggest issue. Yes, they are a ramp-up strategy. Yes, they do have the Midas Dawn. But now they have payoffs. And now they have better early game consistency. And now they just have consistency. With the introduction of the Luffy leader with the red cards, now you can play the red Nami to search your purple film cards and your purple Luffy cards. Very, very powerful, very, very strong, and very, very consistent. These decks are going to be huge metagame contenders in the coming format, and I can't really tell you if these decks will be the best decks. I can't tell you if Red Pure is going to be the best deck continuing. It's really hard to say. Right now, Whitebeard is still the best deck, even after a big swing of nerfs, but who knows? Once these new decks come out, there'll probably be another ban list, and the format can keep shaping however we see it. The OCG has its own results right now, but I don't want to go by the OCG because, like the TCG and the Yu-Gi-Oh!, the OCG and the TCG don't usually line up. So I just want to see what we can figure out with the game going forward here. So that's really it about this video. I hope you all enjoyed. This is probably one of the longest videos I've made on the channel. So please like and subscribe. We are literally 1 subscriber away from 700 subscribers. So please subscribe. Thank you so much for the video. Thank you so much for the content. And thank you so much for believing in me. I hope you all enjoy. Don't do anything stupid. And I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.